No, perfectly fine. Thank you so much for joining this first sort of activity, so-called, that we've done. We've started with for the RC11, Sociology of Environment of the ISS. We have planned a lot of things and still planning how to take this forward and make it more this space of the RC11 sort of lively space where scholars can come and discuss their work and have meetings and seminars, etc., online, offline. Offline, of course, is more preferred. But so this is just the beginning that we've taken, and we are very grateful to Dr. Sudha Vasan for agreeing to have this book discussion on this very, very relevant volume that she's edited, Environmental Studies from India, Oxford University Press. And so I'd invite her to speak and give a sort of orientation about how, when, why, what are the thoughts that went into this volume. And then we have the discussant for this book discussion, Professor Amites Mukhopadhyay from Jadavpur University, who will be discussing this book. And then we will open it up for discussions and question answers, right? So I invite Professor Sudha Vasan to share her thoughts on this. Thank you so much.
I was just saying thank you for all of you who are here. And Anupama, can you just move to the next slide? I just have about 2-3 slides to sort of locate what are the main, ideas. So the initial idea of the book was clearly to look at how environmental studies should be done, given the current juncture at which we are. And there was also clarity that this would be from the standpoint of doing research in the global south. So we did look at India and India as a location of the global south. And in the introduction as well, I make an argument of how this standpoint of doing field research in the global south actually gives us a particular perspective on environmental studies. So that is something that was important to the book. The second kind of point that I think brought the book together was this idea that we have been doing environmental studies now for 50, 60 years, as within different disciplines. But today, of course, we are faced with problems that we talk about at the planetary scale, whether it's climate change or, various planetary boundaries that are being breached. And environmental studies as a field has generally emphasized the importance of context. So we are doing contextual research located in specific places, India in the context of the book, and yet we are really trying to also address planetary ecological changes. So that was the second sort of crux, or the thing that held this book together. The third came about in the course of the year, the 2 years that all the authors within this book and we were actually, the discussions that we had. That was, I wanted to mention that we began with the concept of the Anthropocene. Yeah. But in these 2 years, we also realized that the Anthropocene is a very specific kind of discourse, yeah, which has material linkages to the planetary crisis, and yet the Anthropocene became a kind of keyword which could mean different things to different people. So in the introduction in particular, I pitched the book as being located in the Anthropocene moment, a discursive moment where on the one sense, we are very conscious of the planetary boundaries, of the fact that, the human society itself, human species might be at the brink of extinction. And at the same time, we're also in this moment of hubris where we wish to claim or we wish to believe that humans as a species have planetary level or geological level impact. Yeah. So that combination of hubris and vulnerability, I think, marks this moment. And again, the question to all of us was, how do we do contextualized environmental studies in this kind of moment? And the last but not the least, something again that connects the different chapters, is the focus on scale. How do we connect different scales, the very local, often ethnographic or even, other kinds of methodologies as well, but really looking at local context and changes. how do we connect this to the regional and, of course, the global and then the planetary? So this work across scale. And the other, of course, that I felt all the authors sort of felt was the need to be able to look at moving objects, moving processes and flows rather than objects, which tended to be the focus of early environmental studies. So within this, we're looking at time, space, and capital, which is my next slide. Anupama. So again, as the slide comes on, I just want to point out that there are 16 authors, 16 different authors who've contributed to this book. Manisha Rao, of course, one of the authors, is also here. And what we actually did, looking at those 4 points that I mentioned in my previous slide, was look at our own work. Often, many of the authors have worked for 10, 20 years in the field, so they're bringing that experience. There are a few new authors who are looking at, again, based on their field work. And the book itself is divided into 5 broad pathways. So these are the 5 broad pathways that we came up with, which we thought when we were asking the question, how do we do environmental studies today? In an interdisciplinary manner. Environmental studies, by its very nature, has always been interdisciplinary. But if we highlight that, and if we are looking at time, space, and capital and how they are changing, there were 5 main themes that came up, which are the 5 units into which the book is divided. Yeah, so these are the 5 broad, frameworks that come up from the book. I'm addressing these as pathways, the way in which we can do environmental studies, given the challenges that I mentioned in the last slide. So one of the things that many of the chapters in the book, again, are tied together, are looking at the idea of space and how do we reconceptualize space. One of the important ideas is, of course, of the region. And again, from the perspective of, really decolonizing knowledge and thinking of region, we point out that region has come up in very different contexts, perhaps from European sources, which have looked at regional sociology, for instance, at one point was a major sort of RC in the international sociological society as well. Whereas there's also, other conceptualization of socio-ecological political region, such as in Radha Kamal Mukherjee. We sort of bring these together, and you have 3 chapters in particular which are trying to reconceptualize the region. One, Saikya, Arupjyoti Saikya, looking at monsoon as one of the things that reconceptualize entire geographies, and we need to take more seriously than we do currently. Mukul Sharma looking at caste and how that actually create cascapes across the regions that we are working in. And we also have Purendra Prasad looking at a coastal region and thinking of Capitalocene, looking at the entire coastal region as a region created by capital itself. So that is one pathway that is important. The second one, again, that comes up is the idea of environmental subjectivities and natures. Subjectivities, of course, looking at how people themselves change the ways they think. So we actually have Buddhaditya, who's looking at territorialization, that various forms of territorialization. In fact, in central India, where the state has been implementing various policies and projects in the Adivasi regions of India. We have Manisha's work, of course, that looks at the afterlives of environmental movements, looking at the APICO, of course, and how people's current subjectivities, have elements of earlier social movements. You have Brahma, who's looking at entanglement, looking at the Sundarbans, and looking how the lives of fisher folks, their subjectivities, is entangled with the ecological changes and the economic changes happening in the region. And you have Asmita Kabra, who's looking at forests itself as political forests, looking particularly at Kuno and how it has gone through these various changes which has affected both the nature of the forest nature of the Adivasi people who are actually now employed in some of these conservation projects. And last but not the least, the changes in the nature of the carnivores themselves, including the cheetah and the grass, and how they have changed, as other things have changed in the region. A third theme that has been significant is connecting the commons and commodification. We actually don't look at these separately, but we look at these as entangled. So you have, ideas, Deepak writing about how community lands have and communities themselves transform as the commons are being commodified in Arunachal Pradesh. You have Neil Young looking at fluid nature, what happens when property comes in contact with waterscapes rather than landscapes. And you have Heather Bedi looking at solar farms and how that transition itself is linked up with issues of justice that goes beyond the transition, energy transition discussions alone. The fourth pathway that we look at is the idea of metabolism. There are a few of the chapters which use a very close systems perspective, a socio-ecological systems perspective. So you have, a chapter that looks at long-term changes in the relationship between grasslands, forests, elephants, farmers in Kerala, how that entire social ecology is transforming and co-evolving together. You have, a chapter that looks at agrarian ecology, looking at agriculture in the Malwa and looking at how borewells, in fact, as well as the neoliberal market for agricultural commodities actually transforming both the ecology of farmlands as well as farmers and their subjectivities as well, and the kind of labor that is involved in that. And you also have infrastructural labor, particularly with a focus on waste and how waste is an important aspect of environmental studies. So, through these chapters, what we're also trying to do is broadening the scope of what is in a standard way thought of as environmental studies. So we are actually bringing in issues of industrial labor and caste. For instance, in castscapes, we're actually looking at, bricklins and leather workers. And of course, we are looking at just transition and the other side of just transition. In metabolic lives, we are actually looking at waste and smart cities and how that is also an environmental issue. So we're actually linking together, and of course, agrarian ecology, the linkage between agriculture itself as being important to what we do in environmental studies. So that is the fourth theme. And the fifth, of course, is the idea of the Anthropocene. As I mentioned at the beginning, I look at Anthropocene as a discourse in the introduction and particularly offer a critique of it. However, again, this section is one that will show you that through this book, what we're trying to do is generate a debate. So the idea was not to have total agreement among authors in terms of our perspective on any one environmental issue or any one environmental studies pathway. But the idea was to actually have a little bit of friction that generates debate. And the Anthropocene as everyday experience in particular does that with respect to the introduction. We actually have an author who takes the Anthropocene not just as a discourse, but also as potentially a material change. And we have a historian of, early modern history in South Asia who's suggesting that what is wrong with the Anthropocene in terms of the populist discourse is probably searching for the markers merely in Europe and the Industrial Revolution. So you have an article that looks at early modern Asian history for markers of the Anthropocene. You have a second chapter here, which looks particularly at policy responses and looks at mainstream state bureaucratic organizations like the RBI and looks at how policy itself addresses or fails to address or finds it difficult to address, the issue of scale. There's the requirement of granular data when we are trying to connect things at a very micro scale, the studies that we do at a micro scale to planetary level changes. And last but not the least, we have a chapter that challenges the ontology that has been used even in some of the earlier chapters, which argues for looking at particular indigenous ontology to understand or reframe or rephrase what might be called climate change or even the Anthropocene. So the last section, in fact, takes the Anthropocene seriously and presents material challenges to the idea of the Anthropocene based on everyday experience. So this broadly is what the book is about. As a last slide, Anupama, just one more. So the key kind of interventions we feel we were making as a result of 2 years of discussions among 17 of us is really, 20 of us, a couple of chapters, of course, are co-authored, but there are 16 chapters apart from the introduction. The book, you should notice, is in a series on social studies by Professor Sujata Patel. And the series itself is particular that this is an interdisciplinary social science series. So it's not disciplinary in terms of sociology, pol science, or any other. But on the other hand, it is interdisciplinary within the social sciences. So the book does this in all the authors. In fact, within each chapters as well, there is a fair amount of interdisciplinarity. Each author is trying from their disciplinary location to reach out and draw from other disciplines. But of course, as a collection, it's definitely an interdisciplinary collection from all the social sciences. The second thing that we're looking at, of course, is indicated in the title of the book, where we are calling it Environmental Studies from India. So we are not suggesting that it's environmental studies for ourselves or because we are Indian or anything like that. We're in fact arguing that from our location as researchers doing field research in India, these are the insights we propose for environmental studies everywhere. So there is sorry, excuse me, a tip of the hat to the idea that we are not, we're not taking Eurocentric knowledge as central or as universal. The third, of course, I've already spoken a lot about the idea of integration of scales. Majority of the studies are actually micro studies, detailed. We have some ethnographies, we have some case studies, which are very, very specific in terms of their ecological focus. We are looking at forests and grasslands and industries and monsoonscapes and all of those. But each essay is also speaking to what does that mean in the context of planetary crisis. The fourth, of course, is the avoiding of fragmentation. Again, I've already mentioned this in terms of not seeing agriculture or industry or urbanization as separate fields, but seeing that as an important and central topic within environmental studies. And last but not the least, of course, that we are trying throughout to focus on processes and flows rather than the object, rather than any kind of object called the environment. So we are making the case for environmental studies as itself being a focus on processes or flows of time, space, and capital. Yeah. So this is what we've tried to do. So I look forward, of course, to hearing what somebody who's read the book feels about these ideas. Thank you so much. Anupama, my last slide is just a thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sudha. We still have people coming in. Without taking any more time, I request Professor Amites Mukhopadhyay to start.
Yeah, maybe a little 20 minutes, otherwise probably.
No, I think you can go on and then we will have, we can maybe 5 minutes for discussion.
Zoom permits that.
Yeah, I think so. You can go over.
At the very outset, I thank Professor Sudha Vasan for this wonderful volume, Environmental Studies from India, Engaging in the Planetary Ecological Crisis, and particularly sharing with me this very extremely sort of an insightful volume. I'm thankful to Professor Manisha Rao and Professor Jimli Bhattacharya, convener and co-convener of RC11, for organizing this book discussion. In a sense, I'm thankful once again to Sudha for setting out the terrain in some sense, introducing the book at variety of levels, and in what follows, there might be some of this, ideas coming across repetitious because I'm going to be visiting the book once again in some sense, and therefore the volume, particularly this editorial piece, begins by engaging the planetary crisis, what is described as a definite historical moment that makes us aware and perhaps instill in us a sense of an anxiety of the impact of human activities on Earth's climate and ecosystem. A moment, to quote author, forces us to face the possibility of an extinction of our own species. And in trying to discern the implications such a definitive historical moment has for environmental studies, author exposes us to another moment, which is the Anthropocene moment, a powerful concept that emphasizes the central role of mankind, to quote author once again, in geology and ecology, a role that helps us grapple with the extent and perhaps magnitude of this planetary crisis. Author situates these historical moments and the challenges therein in the epistemic concerns of human sciences, environmental studies as a kind of an expression of that. Author cites Chakravarti's Climate of History, arguing that it is impossible to think through planetary crisis without thinking on the temporal and geographical scales of the species. How does environmental studies concerned with the centrality of human place in nature proceed with a critical engagement with the multiple meanings of Anthropocene? To quote author, the driving forces of what is being recognized as planetary derive from a specific social structures rather than species at large, wide trait. They are rather sociogenic than anthropogenic. In other words, engaging these historical moments and the most critical challenges of our time means that we engage them through recourse to concepts, categories, keywords that have their distinctive careers unfolding in specific historical context. Author engages these critical moments, drawing on the experience of the Global South, in particular India, as according to author, Global South has a well-established critique of the generalized anthropos as a singular, universalizing, and essentialized political subject. Thus, author has called into question not simply the nature-culture duality, which has been problematic for quite some time now, which she kind of expresses that it feared that it re-enters the scene at its highest stage of development through Anthropocene discourse, but focusing on Global South, where environment studies has been shaped by decisive concerns, author has provincialized certain experiences and theorizing born out of them perceived as universal. This is not to suggest that the volume turns a blind eye to the global forces. To quote, frictions between planetary scale brought into conversation by the Anthropocene and the global scale, emphasized by the flows of capital and the scale of everyday experience of the environment, open up analytical pathways to better understand emergent processes. And this is exactly what this volume does focus on. The articles in the volume that editor organizes under different themes engage Anthropocene at a variety of levels. For example, Mayank Kumar's volume, the piece, in searching for the markers of Anthropocene, which is almost towards the end of the volume, suggests that we tend to focus on immediate and catastrophic events, rather not look at not so sudden and gradual changes drawing on divergent historicities, historical sources, views agrarian expansion along with the demographic growth in early modern Asia, and it's transformed the way it has transformed pasture, need of a fodder for large animals, destroyed forest, created condition for capitalist development, and that be considered as the markers of Anthropocene. Non's article, in a very distinctive sense, brings out space, time, capital, three axes in addressing social nature of our goods and services with use value are faced with the threat of dissipation due to planetary crises, but also looks up to capital in a very significant way, which it sees in the NGFS, which is largely network for greening the financial system for RBI, at a kind of a potential for integrating climate and environmental risks in institutions dealing with financial capital, and to assess these institutions' capacity to integrate data at multiple scales essential for such integration. Tanya Mathan article looks at this question of the capital in a slightly different way when she shows how capitalist agrarian transformations intersect with climate change to produce an enhanced risk for smallholder farmers, but in a sense that also produces a very nuanced engagements with the notion of capital as it travels in a specific circumstance, in a specific context of the career of the global capital in rural life worlds of central India. Mathan traces the transformation looking at introduction of soybean as high yielding and short duration cash crops, bringing in new risks, and constructed deep wells that allow for multi-cropping cycles, high yields, higher incomes, and groundwater depletion that come in its wake. Purvendra Prasad's piece once again looks at global capitals, how it redefines socio-ecological regions, destroying ecology and society. Prasad talks about the dominance of capital in building ports, SEZs, SIRs, manufacturing, environmental impact assessment reports, facilitating land acquisition, suppressing peasant unrest, protests, etc. In some sense, a kind of a totalizing logic of capital in silencing many other voices. Budhaditya Das's article interestingly invokes the idea of environmentality to look at significant statist interventions, primarily the primarily in the context of the community forestry. There is a joint forest management in its inception in the 1990s, and the Forest Act Rights Act, which have been intervention that had a particular presence felt at the local level in terms of the way in which it has transformed subjectivities, the Adivasis in the central India, and how this discursive history combined with material practices produces resistance and subscription both at the same time in the same breath. As we move to Munster Frank's article, we look at this question of we look at this whole idea of how certain field forest duality, particularly emerging in Wayanad district in Kerala, which has also become a significant, climate hotspot regions in recent times in India, that political ecology debates focus either on the agrarian, and that's how he starts with his argument. And he tries to suggest that as Wayanad has become a climate vulnerable hotspot in recent years, revisiting this binary and how this is produced historically and normalized by governmentalities, kind of produces and creates a conditions where you look at the planetary crisis to a greater depth, particularly this whole idea of metabolism, planetary ill health, and material political epistemic infrastructure that maintains separation between the field and forest becomes almost invisible in their moments of rupture when wild animals graze the forest trenches, or cattle graze illegally in forest, or veterinary toxins seep into the forest systems. In a different context, Gidwani and Anantaraman's essay looks at the precarity of the metabolic work of the informalized waste pickers under the regime of formalization of solid waste management, when particularly the waste from scrap materials and garbage, which something that they were used to all this while, are valorized in their new commodity forms, lucrative commodity frontier. Highlighting three particular cases, Indore, Delhi, and Pune, in order of their certain level of formalization. Delhi became a unique case where formalized practices often are found to coexist with various forms of exploitation, appropriation of labor. And then Pune, which once again sort of demonstrated very high standards in certain regime of formalization. Highlighting these three particular cases, he argues that, they both argue that these dissipative forces that proliferate under capitalism, if they are unchecked, can create a metabolic interaction of humans and nature. In more or less similar vein, Saikia's article looks at this whole question of climate and its particular way in which it unfolds. In the case of Assam, particularly the monsoon, the career of monsoon in Assam's identity as a particular region, and Brahmaputra's Brahmaputra being a very significant force that constitutive of the region's identity at one point of time, completely got disrupted and destroyed with the onset of colonial changes, particularly in hydrology, in the irrigation system. Professor Manisha Rao's article does once again revisit this question of farm, field, and forest, and tries to look at how this whole question of climate and the climate precarity sort of puts people, particularly in the afterlife of a movement, in a quandary as to how to sort of negotiate between the legacy of a sustainable farming identity and changing pressures on the agrarian returns and development aspirations. Having sort of touched on some of the articles, I quickly sort of go back to the editorial piece, where I once again sort of get back to the arguments which Sudha Vasan makes in the initial pages, And to buttress our arguments in the initial pages of editorial piece, at another level, she looks at the career and biography of the environmental studies in India, starting from the contributions of Radhakamal Mukherjee, Verrier Elwin, Patrick Geddes, J.C. Kumarappa, the early sort of environmental thinking, which still sought to sort of carve a niche out, even when the larger narrative was that of developmental nation, where the dams predominate, certain economically driven idea of national growth sort of predominated, restrictive, coercive forest practices prevailed, which was in many ways a kind of a continuation of Forestry Act in 1878 and its many others eventually that we came across in both colonial and post-independent India. But nonetheless, in a very interesting way, Radhakamal Mukherjee stands kind of woven into many articles. In some sense, the Radhakamal's idea of this living organism that entangles the inanimate human, non-human life in a web of life, that's very interesting and very powerful. That when we do look at environmental studies in 2026, it does make sense at variety of levels, and particularly many of the articles in the volume are expressive of this particular theme when they looked at very specific regional, local contexts at different scales, as Sudha has already pointed out, and the very nuanced processes unfolding in variety of ways, and particularly unfolding around flows of capital, ecological problem, ecological subjectivities of different kinds. Elwin's, Verrier Elwin's Beigers and Goans and emphasis on indigenous life, which was perhaps in many sense a kind of was meant to be a kind of a corrective to the racial underpinnings of early colonial interventions, but was also in a very significant way informed the development narrative that was very strongly present in the 50s and 60s of India. And of course, Patrick Geddes and Kumarappa's ideas did carve out a very significant ecological place amidst the developmental logic that kind of informed the progress of Indian state and the journey of the Indian nation. And author notes that all these began to sort of undergo significant transformation by the 1980s, when the dams that once stood for development, science, technology, and triumph over nature were soon sort of designated as dooms, and we had series of protests, both against certain installations, certain development practices, and also exclusivist and a very, very restrictive kind of forest conservation practices. And particularly with the coming into being of social ecology of Ramachandra Guha, who identifies both Chipko and Bhopal gas tragedy as two very significant moments in bringing environmental studies almost back to its center stage, and also a kind of a time when in 1950 United Nations in its development charter for the development of the so-called underdevelopment sectors immediately after the Second World War suggested that all parochial pockets of unreason be completely removed in the state's march to the kind of a modernist path of development. Exactly 40 years, 1992, 1991, in the Rio summit, the whole discourse kind of changes. And I'm reminded of Arun Agrawal's that very provocative essay that that the community which at once was considered to be inimical to development was brought back into the main agenda of what would count as sustainable development. The North-South distinction in environmentalism was reconceptualized, particularly in three distinct forms, all of which are very significantly sort of present in the articles that this volume contains. One is the cult of wilderness, not so much that the volumes engaged wilderness as a very essentialized idea, but something which was made to appear as a very significant rhetorical concept in trying to put forth certain claims. The gospel of eco-efficiency, which is basically the flows of capital into various ecological contexts, and environmentalism of the poor, which once again brings us to the Guha and Martinez earlier, identifying various varieties of environmentalism, and they kind of pitted the post-materialist phase of the global north against the environmentalism of the poor, or the competing struggles or claims over resources and their unique historicities. And global colonial histories began to be revisited within environmental studies, and this is also when a lot of environmental sensibilities is environmental sensibilities hidden under the guise of historical forces, processes which were dug out, and a whole series of environmental studies were done historically to look at certain ways in which the idea of the tragedy of the common could be re-understood in a colonial context. And pre-colonial past was also something which was not really identified. I mean, there were studies which also suggested that that in trying to go back to India's past, there's an often tendency to sort of portray that as idyllic, unchanging, and in many ways unproblematic, which was also sort of contested by the writings within that emerged within environmental studies, and particularly a couple of concepts which come up eventually, which I'm going to turn to very soon, but quickly sort of just touch on this question of ecofeminism and its critiques, and something that we all know that with the publication of the writings by Veena Agarwal or people like Cecil Jackson, this has been critiqued, and once again, their writings were in many ways a sort of a corrective to this essentialized idea of women being closer to nature, which in some sense was also trying to sort of consolidate the earlier much and interrogated division between nature and culture. This does throw up a number of terms which are kind of present in all the articles. In a sense, they engage with the specific empirical reference as they build their arguments. For example, the whole idea of indigeneity, something that Sudha has elaborated quite at length in terms of what it means, that it primarily appeared in two distinct registers concerned with rights alienation, and second, recognition of a distinctive ontological relation to a non-human nature. And this kind of leads me to sort of put forth and ask this, that would it be enough also to would it be somewhat relevant to raise this along with the two registers that you have talked about, that how often, something that I keep seeing in most of these articles that have come up in this volume, how often does indigeneity articulate in its encounter with the modern regime of power and global flows of capital, and therefore it is more than articulation which perhaps becomes more important than indigeneity per se. In other words, I'm reminded of Amita Bhaviskar's and those opening lines in her Belly of the River, where she's been saying that you are brought up on certain ideas when you are going to visit the tribal world, Adivasi habitat, and you simply see how your very neat categories simply collapse into jumble of contradictions. And this is what makes me wonder that is it indigeneity as sort of something that we retrieve as knowledge outside the intellectual and the institutional confines of the modern? Or if that be the case, then how does one articulate that? The other is the question that has come up very strongly in many of these articles, that community, in a sense in which it has come back. And I was wondering whether this renewed life of community, the way it has found its resurgence in resource studies and resource use participation discourses, that does it really sit very unproblematically at the one end of the spectrum, where the other end is occupied by capital? Or is it that the stories of capital are often found very distinctly interwoven into those of community as well? In some sense, the various articles that are presented in the volume, in the process of sort of highlighting, in the process of privileging certain community ways of life, their proximity to their very distinct ecologies and contexts, perhaps the story of capital has turned out to be a little totalizing to my mind, and perhaps this nuanced understanding of capital and community perhaps is something which increasingly becomes a very significant component of how we understand community and its career in the global south. The other is the farm field which has emerged in its various forms in many writings, and in most of the cases it is the authors have questioned the taken for granted assumptions and the way in which they have been maintained, legitimized through recourse to certain governmentalities, to recourse to certain ordering of the way in which the universe has been made to appear in a particular way. And of course, those articles were meant to be a corrective in trying to reimagine how field and forest, in other words, the wilderness and so-called the realm of civilization, could be brought together in a very unique sort of an interplay with each other. The other is very significantly that figures in the writing, in the articles of Young and Parama Mukhopadhyay, which is about the fluid ecologies, where you have just as you have the farm forest binaries been questioned in many of these articles, the land water binary has been questioned, and how does one understand the whole idea of capital and its inroads in a landscape which is essentially quite fluid. And here we are also reminded of writings of historians like Christopher Hill, where who has written extensively on the Bengal Delta, with which I'm kind of somewhat familiar, that the whole idea of this permanent settlement, the way it was implemented in these fluid geographies, had turned completely counterproductive, and something that Young also talks about in his article, when says that this Majuli is almost on the verge of a disappearance. It is going to there are apprehensions that it might not be there in time to come, and yet the capitals and the property regime seems to unfold in a very, very distinct way, putting this whole idea of climate and capital in a very, very uncomfortable relationship. Poroma's article brings about the question of the fishers in the manner in which they are often fish hunters, and then their engagement with forest, particularly the way in which their life revolves around forest with all its dangers, niceties, the curiosities, vulnerabilities. But at the same time, she is also trying to sort of trace a change in this entire scenario when you have the fishers living and quitting their occupation and moving to the cities in search of occupation, livelihoods, etc., which kind of puts this whole idea of the identity of fishers in a quandary, and kind of makes us aware of these changes in this ecological subjects, the way they engaged the fluidity and the land water, sort of land water the kind of sort of blurring of this sharp line that we often associate with land-water binary, and therefore, as we look at these chapters and as they and move through them towards the end of the volume, one also feels that the anxieties with which the volume open its arguments, the initial pages, and as we move through the chapters, we also feel that volume engages critically also with a climate reductive lens in some sense, and looks upon planetary crisis as providing an opportunity, providing a context to encounter and unravel structural asymmetries, systemic inequities, which perhaps become a lot more glaring in certain circumstances when you have this kind of an anxiety being foregrounded, planetary crisis and Anthropocene. Particularly, Sudha has talked about Mukul Sharma's article with respect to the caste and its presence, and in many ways, many other articles also look at caste and its encounter with certain ways in which the modern institutions and practices crystallize in specific context. But there's another reason why Mukul Sharma's article kind of comes close to the kind of argument that I'm trying to suggest, that the brick industry and the tannery both have a certain certain conditions which are almost unbearable in climate extremes, and therefore when we have the climate extreme argument being put forth, it is only those systemic inequities and the structural asymmetries become a lot more glaring, which otherwise you would not have probably looked at in that sense. In other words, the more we talk about Anthropocene as a very significant moment and the climate planetary crisis, the more we try and dig out, unearth the asymmetries and the inequalities that often lie hidden under different disguises in different contexts. And therefore, in a sense, Saikia's article, Mukul Sharma's article, apart from dealing with a particular way in which a particular region has been, sort of constituted, shaped, and reshaped time and again, they also kind of suggest that that looking at monsoon, looking at what Brahmaputra did to this particular state at one point in time, or looking at tanneries and brick industries, it is important that we must look at them in the light of climate extremes as well. And climate extremes at one level is the kind of absence of certain infrastructural facilities, certain infrastructure not being available to people who are working as labor, and in other contexts, certain infrastructure being put in place by the colonial regime, which had turned things upside down. In a sense, I'm trying to also think of environment as providing an occasion for understanding certain infrastructural histories as well. For example, Debjani Bhattacharya's book, which is in many sense engages a fluidity of the deltaic Kolkata, but what predominates in the engagement and her preoccupation was that infrastructure actually was being born in the archives in a scale and in a place which was a kind of soaked ecology, and in many ways displaces our standard imagination of a place making. What does it mean to build a solid property state that you call infrastructure and Kolkata out of processes which were basically sedimentation, sedimentation, Mars, biota, which entered the colonial archive in a specific way and assigned a sense of fixity to things which were otherwise not very fixed. Having said this, I'll come to quickly to the almost to the end. With this, I would try and end my what might appear as my rumblings, bit all over the place, and I'm terribly sorry about that. But I was also wondering if I could do justice to this volume, which is sort of its magnitude in terms of its length and breadth. It's indeed a very, very provocative and an insightful volume. Is the other thing which I am trying to think of is that in engaging planetary crisis, in engaging Anthropocene, is it important that we also think of the non-human world in some sense, in a sense in which how humans make them appear? Not exactly that, but I'm trying to think of, Eduardo Cohn's, Can Forest thing, kind of an argument where, which challenges the Cartesian divide and also tries to talk about that while humans use symbolic language, other beings interact through iconic indexical signs and so on and so forth, but which the reason why I kind of raise this is particularly these are quite abundantly present in Paroma's article and also in the first article which deals with Assam. I forget name of the author, which is Arupjyoti Saikia, that this idea is present in both of them. I simply read a little quickly from the passage of Paroma's work. which makes, if I could read this quickly, the song describes interaction among various animals of the forest. So if you go inside the forest, you'll realize how everything is communicating with one another. Expand Rasul Mia. The trees talk among themselves and with us. The animals send us messages to one another. The river tides dictate our movements and animals to comply with them. Even the boat and the net guides interacts with us. It feels like we are in the company of a continuous family chain of a family, like the one we live in the lands. And sorry, I'm so sorry about this. And quickly sort of one line about Arupjati Saikias, that how Arupjati is actually introducing monsoon and Brahmaputra, and the manner in which it is so sort of poetically sort of invoked, that that prior to monsoon there is this thunder and lightning which kind of forces the soil out of its long wintry slumber and so on and so forth, which kind of makes me remind of that I'm reminded of this particular dimension, which I thought is perhaps might seem worth considering. But I'm particularly thankful to Sudha for immensely benefiting from this volume, and kind of it's both a learning and unlearning experience both at the same time. And I'm immensely thankful that you at least ask me to sort of look at this and discuss this in today's meeting. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry that I kind of kept you waiting, and because I simply lost track of Prama's article. Thank you so much. I do not know if that at all does any justice or is complete injustice to the volume that has been so laboriously and meticulously done.
Thank you so much, Professor Amites, for that detailed, discussion over the book. I seem to have lost connection from my laptop, so I've joined through the phone. So quickly, if there are any questions, suggestions, or any responses on this discussion from those present, we could probably have 5 minutes for that. Or if probably Sudha wants to respond.
Oh,
If
I'll just
anyone-
begin with a thank you, but if there are other questions, maybe other comments, I could say a few things after that, if yeah.
Sure.
But
Anupama, just see if people have raised their hands or something.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
I'll do that. People can also ask their questions in the chat if they want to.
Right.
should I come in, Manisha? I can
Yes, I think it should.
want
Yeah.
to, yeah. I think I just wanted to say thank you to Amites. I think there's so much. I mean, it's wonderful to have, somebody who's taken the trouble to read a book and then comment on it, because I think you end up seeing many things that someone like me who's been reading this draft again and again hasn't seen. I think some of the points you raised are very important for the kind of work that I think all of us will be doing as we go on from here. Particularly, I wanted to begin with the last point that you made, the whole idea of the non-human. And I think several chapters actually do that. There is people who are coming from the field, the quotations that have been used in many of the other chapters as well, the Munster chapter, where they look at the elephant and the grass and how things are changing. or Asmita's work, where the cheetah, itself is changing. The cheetah's habits and are themselves changing. I think that is one that I think hasn't been tied up as a. That itself, I think, is an area where I think a lot of new work is emerging as well. A lot of young people I know working on PhDs on things like that, and I think that is something that I'd love to see more of. There is a bit in the book that hasn't been tied together, but I think thank you for that. But a number of the other issues that you raised as well, I think, are so critical. One, in some sense, I'm happy that they are in the book in different places, but I think things that we as a community doing environmental sociology should also take, I think, much more seriously and work on. I think I missed one of the points when I had some connectivity issues, but a couple of questions that you asked, I think, again, I don't think I would, be arrogant enough to answer them, but I thought maybe we could discuss them a little bit if the group here as well is interested. The whole idea of indigenous knowledge, and I think you asked if indigeneity, we really retrieve the knowledge is outside the confines of the modern. I think that is a question that keeps bothering me as well. Again, as I said, the idea of bringing this is a collective work, a collective labor of love in some sense. This book, and there are differences amongst the authors as well. We might disagree on certain points, but I think that is an interesting debate that remains among the authors of the book as well. For instance, the last chapter, someone like Sabyasachi, who has a long history of work looking at alternative ontologies, does frame it as something that remains outside the modern. Whereas me, who's an editor, but I mean, who really appreciates that kind of work, but I also see capital as having transformed all of us, including indigeneity and indigenous. So I think that is
I
one
couldn't agree
that,
more with you on that.
yeah,
Sabyasachi was somebody I had on my mind when I was making that point. Yeah, please.
yeah. Yeah, so in the book or in the collection, we decided to leave it as is, to leave those differences in the book, where there is a chapter that would argue that indigeneity is entirely outside or significantly outside the modern and not encompassed by it, and others who might take a political ecology perspective and argue how knowledge is integrated with the modern as well. Not that it's not important or distinctive, but yeah. So that is a disagreement that remains, but we think it's a productive sort of tension.
That provokes you into
Yeah,
sort of disagreeing and thinking through.
yes, yeah. So your other questions as well. I think you've picked on all the ones that remain tensions, and I think it's important to highlight them as well. The idea of again the idea of community, the stories of capital interwoven with stories of community. Interestingly, I think almost all the authors, the chapters in the book, see them as being interwoven. So this idea of romanticization of community is something that everybody is conscious of. It came up in the workshop we had around the book as well, and so we're constantly challenging ourselves with this notion of, we do argue, I think most of the chapters, or maybe all of us argue that there is still a community that is created by this kind of, extreme exploitation that capital brings, whether it's the farmers in Malwa who are pushed to dig deeper and deeper, bore wells, or, the fishers in Prama Mukhopadhyay's work, where it's really, I mean, there is something about community that's so important in this fragmented neoliberal world. On the other hand, you can see that itself is changing. So change really is the only constant, even for community. So that again is a tension, a productive tension, I think, all the chapters sort of deal
Absolutely.
with.
The idea is to sort of ask questions to which answers are not always easily sort of available. And in that sense, you live with that perpetual dilemma and uncertainty of not being able to provide an answer.
Yeah, we're dealing with this as
No,
contradictions that
this is
remain,
incredibly
that we live with.
rich volume, Sudha. To
Thank you.
discuss this, not teasing out its different elements would be impossible. And to do that would basically sort of one engages the volume in a very, very significant way. Otherwise, it is such a sort of learning experience for anybody looking at the volume and reading them. It's
Thank
incredible.
you.
Which is why
Yeah.
I thanked you that you shared this with me, and incredibly sort of beneficial. I kind of unlearned many things.
Thank you. That's generous of you. And yeah, I think all your points bring out the tensions and the contradictions on which we need to focus on and work. So I think it's useful for all of us as researchers to sort of think of what we need to do, how we do environmental studies now. So yeah.
Thank you so much for that. I think before the Zoom throws us out,
Been generous to
we
us,
could
no?
go
It's
on.
been
That's what
Yes.
more than
what
an hour.
struck me, that it's been extremely generous, because
Yeah.
you've been allowed also to record, and record uninterrupted almost.
Right.
Yeah.
Except for current going off or network connectivity going off.
Yeah.
That's it.
My electricity went off a few
Right.
times.
Can I request Professor Jimli, if there are no other, is she there?
Yeah.
Yeah,
See her. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm there.
Yeah.
Before I go for doing the ritual, I also have some comments for the book, actually. So I took the privilege to ask about that particular aspect. Actually, I just remembering about Stephen Hawking's comment that we should move to space and we should colonize another planet, otherwise we'll get extinct in 100 years. So this is the right point. I think when we are talking about planetary crisis and talking about environmental studies from India. So one aspect I'm finding, of course, there are a lot of scopes to incorporate in the book, but maybe technology as a dimension and how technology can shape the spaces. Talking about the seed technology, bringing indigeneity in one side, and of course there are some discussions on neoliberalism and kind of thing. But maybe technology is another dimension which can define space. This is one. And secondly, technology as a solution for environmental crisis, like we are talking about going to another planet, or maybe we are talking about sustainable development. So that particular dimension maybe somewhere, is also equally important. What I'm thinking. Anyway, so my job is over. I'll be going through the book again. Now I'm getting more interest in the book, and I really am grateful personally for this particular enlightenment. So as a co-convener, as Manisha has given me the responsibility to offer vote of thanks, I really think that I am very privileged to be here in this RC, and to have this, to be a part of this one, and also as a kind of getting the scope to offer the vote of thanks. So let me just start expressing my deep sense of gratitude to Indian Sociological Society first, because it's because of this Indian Sociological Society and its RC 11, we have got this platform to come together and discuss and share our views and listen to the writer, author directly in this platform. This is really a great privilege to all of the members of this RC and also the others who are attending this program. So I'm greatly, on behalf of RC 11, I would express my deep sense of gratitude to Professor Sudha for speaking and enlightening us about this particular the framework in which this book has been shaped, and we have also come up with all these ideas. And I remember how Professor Sudha has agreed. Within seconds, she agreed to, consented to speak on this issue. And I understand that this is really a great, job we have done. And it's the actual job of the RC 11, where we should really have, summarize the works of environmental studies. This is the purpose for which we are here, and you have done the job already for us. We are having the entire framework of understanding environmental studies in India or from India, you say. Yeah, Professor Amites is again here with us. We got this. We could hear from him his critique of the work and his, detailing of the book that has been edited. So we got to know many things from him. Our other participants who are attending this program, they have also got who could know many things from the detailings, and as well as with the critical comments. This is really a rare opportunity we are getting. I, on behalf of again Indian Sociological Society and RC 11, I would express my thankfulness to all the participants. Of course, Dr. Manisha will be the person who is the main person behind this entire one, because let me just mention this, because this is the first program, I believe, online program of this RC 11. So first of its sort. At the same time, it's really a very good engagement for us, all of us, and I believe this has set a trend for next days. We can have a number of programs like this, and we can really make this very purpose of being together successful, to know from each other directly like this, a very closed door, closed window. We are having this program. So thanks a lot, and finally thank you again, Sudha and Amites. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Bhattacharya. And just a quick administrative question that I have is that the last meeting that we had, what would be the kind of, are we supposed to meet twice a year or something that we agreed on?
Yes, that's what we agreed on. I had sent the minutes. Of course,
Okay.
it was delayed.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
so probably by mid of this year, right? Twice a year we had
Sure.
Yeah.
So, and we could, in fact, members of this RC as well as others could sort of suggest also to us if they would like to organize something, and we could discuss it and have that, right? Yeah.
Sure.
So thank you.
Okay.
Thank you
then.
so much, Professor Amites. Thank you, Sudha. Thank you,
Absolutely.
Anupama, for
Pleasure. I mean,
handling the
pleasure
back.
to discuss Sudha's book, something that we did discuss in IIT Mandi, I think, no? We went to IIT Mandi,
Yes.
where the book was for the first time discussed, and then I missed this discussion. And then it was indeed a pleasure being able to sort of read the book and share some of my thoughts, which might be relevant or might not be, but the question that remains is that we kind of leave it with this sense of anxiety and uneasiness with respect to the questions that we raise, for which we always do not have answers.
Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you,
Have
Sudha,
a good-
once again. Thank you, Professor Manisha and Professor Chimli, and all those who were there, Anupama and others. Thank you so much.
Thank
So, I will leave now.
Yes, we leave.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.